and welcome. As I mentioned to you Monday, today is a little bit different. I'm going to introduce to you Gwilym McGrew, right? McGrew?
McGrew.
Here in just a moment. Obviously, as you all know, and Mr. McGrew now knows too, we're here to talk about journalistic ethics. He's been a fairly vocal critic of news coverage, including mine. And so I just thought, in the spirit of free speech, it would be worth taking a few minutes to hear some of that. A couple things just I want you to know. I think we're going to talk for maybe 15 minutes or so here, because we do have other classwork to do. I want you to feel free to ask questions of him or me. He has brought a machine to tape today. What I've asked is that stay focused on me, not you. So I've agreed to give my permission to be taped, but not yours. So none of you, I hope, feels any intrusion or anything like that. With that, I turn it over to my hope friend and somewhat rival, Mr. McGrew.
Friendly rival.
Friendly rival.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. And I want to say thank you, Jim, for allowing you just a few minutes to come and say what's on my mind. It's interesting with what's happened in UC Berkeley with Antifa and things going on there. There's an interesting, really bad in some ways, distasteful impression that some people have of the UC system for a conservative just showing up. In fact, one of my business partners who insisted that I state that she's a liberal Democrat lesbian, so I will, my business partner, said to be careful, watch people following you to your car, things that are really ridiculous, I think, but because of what's happened up there, and to a certain extent on this campus too, with people trying to shut down conservative speech, there's a whole set of articles and information that's out there, not just for conservatives, but my Democrat, liberal, lesbian friend has noticed as well, that bias is out there. It may not be real, but it's perceived. And so I just want to say that, in the spirit of upsetting Jim just a little bit, that I think what happened in Berkeley recently is that it proves conservatives are now the free speech liberals. I mean, I think that that's definitely the case. We're the ones fighting for free speech, and it's the progressive, really the Antifa people that are shutting it down. I got into an interesting exchange with Jim on Twitter, and before I get into that, just real quick, just to let you know who I am. First off, looking at me, you can see I'm the stereotypical white, old, fat, conservative guy. Okay? But I do want to point out that Jim is the stereotypical professor, bearded, gray, slightly balding, and I'll bet he has a tweed jacket with a patch somewhere in his closet as well. And that's maybe if, as Hamlet said, we hold the mirror up to nature and you look back at yourself, you might fit into some stereotypes as well. You will get old, hopefully. So, and my weight I'll blame on Stan's Corner Donuts in Westwood, where I used to manage a store across the street from. They used to serve burgers there. They named a burger after me, and I ate a lot. So, on to some interesting things. I'm here to just really kind of throw a little bomb into the works of your journalism ethics world, being taught by a progressive liberal, who, by the way, is open to hearing other thoughts, and that is fantastic. And I've researched Jim a little bit, and his time at the LATiimes, which is quite impressive, and I think he's a very impressive fellow. However, I think he's misguided in some things, and I think that it's worth noting that there is a lot of fake news out there. Fake news on the LATiimes, the media, etc. Some people in this room probably have been taught since their youth that man-made global warming is settled science. You probably sitting here would not question that, because you've heard that from the academic world, from elementary school, junior high, high school. You're sitting in a class where a gentleman believes that, and probably other classes as well. However, there's a cottage industry online now of people just, reading old articles and predictions made by the people on the settled science. Things like, here's one that's going to expire in about 6 weeks, the first of this year, where a person says that the Arctic is at a tipping point. This, by the way, is from James Hansen, who was the director of the Goddard Institute of Space Sciences, and I guess heavily involved in NASA, big scientist. But he says the Arctic is at a tipping point, he wrote back in 2008, and that in 10 years, 6 weeks away, the Arctic will have no sea ice. So we'll see if miraculously in 5.5 weeks it's all going to suddenly melt. I don't think so. He also said that New York and Manhattan would be underwater. If that does melt, then maybe so. But I think that you should not take it as a dogma that it's settled science. Look at how people in the that take that viewpoint have changed the language. Instead of saying man-made global warming, they just say global warming. You're a denier of climate change. Well, conservatives don't deny climate change. Arizona used to be under an ocean twice. Okay, the world here is full of fossils in the mountains. The climate changes. The question is whether man does it, and if so, at what rate. But you shouldn't just assume because you're told that by people who have a lot of status and you have a lot of respect for it, that it's true. You need to do your own research. And I would suggest the worst thing you could do is to say it's settled science. You need to be open to hearing other viewpoints and not do that. Now, the LA Times is not open to that. And I don't know if you were the editor at the time when this was done in 2013, but the LA Times basically said that they weren't going to publish any articles on, in the editorial page, any letters to the editor, where someone said that global warming was not man-made. They just made an edict. They said, we're not doing it because it's false.
I hate to interrupt you, I just acknowledge that not only did it, oh, it doesn't make that either, I made it. So.
There you go. There you go. So, and I think it's reprehensible for a newspaper, not you, for a newspaper to take that stance, to not at least offer up other sides, other opinions for people to weigh in their decision making. What's interesting is if you look at the articles at that time, there were two things, there was something else juxtaposed next to it that proved the kind of letters that the LA Times would not take. And that was letters that claimed that the US Congress had exempted themselves from Obamacare. Okay? That was in that article. Right next to it as another example of what we won't take. And yes, Obamacare did not have a carve-out for the people in Congress, but the Obama administration, so literally that's correct, but in practice, the Obama administration, Health and Human Services people, and their personnel department made a decision to exempt them from being in a group of people where they're categorized as having to be on the individual mandate, and instead said that they are part of, they're like a small business with 50 people or less that is exempt. So they took Congress, which has over 400 employees, and said, you're a small business. So yes, Congress did not make it so that they're exempt, but in practice they were made exempt. And I think it's interesting that this was the example that was next to that climate change thing. The other thing is, I just thought real fast, I'd read through some interesting fake news. Paul Krugman, you know, from the New York Times, when Puerto Rico had its hurricane, tweeted out that there was a cholera outbreak. They were trying to make the Trump administration look bad for supposedly not responding. There's a cholera outbreak now. It's so bad that Trump hasn't responded. The Center for Disease Control 6 hours later had to deny that. A gentleman that's 9 years old wrote the president about trying to mow the lawn at the White House. And the White House reporters jumped into action to find out if this was in fact true, if there really was a child writing this. And there were articles written that there was no such person with this name even born in the year that this kid wrote this article. And all sorts of news articles out there in legitimate news places that were false. The kid not only existed, he came and mowed the lawn, right? You saw the video. Trump was just in China. His little daughter is being taught Chinese, which, by the way, if you go to New York, there's a lot of people in the garment industry, et cetera, that have their children learning Chinese and Mandarin because of the business done in China. So his little, I don't know, 8, 9, 10-year-old granddaughter was learning Chinese, and she said a series of poems on video to the Chinese people. And the Washington Post wrote an article saying that she was forced to say these. Come on. Politico just fired a reporter for saying Trump's family, saying that Trump was effing his daughter. That's a reporter at Politico, was just fired. Let's talk about journalistic ethics, right? By the way, I found these all in an hour. When Katrina happened in Louisiana, the big hurricane, right? And the Bush administration was faulted for not being down there quick enough. Trump this time reacting, got praise from the state people down there. What did MSNBC say? Katie Tur said that he went down to Texas too fast. Bush got criticized for not going fast enough, but Trump's criticized for going too quickly. It's an interesting dichotomy. And I can go on and on. I think one of the more interesting things that just happened, this was a week or two ago, Trump was in Japan, and there was a video shoot of him with President Abe of Japan, and there was a koi pond, fish, right? And they were putting fish food out for the koi. And if you've ever fed koi, they get very aggressive, and it's kind of an entertaining thing to do. So what did every mainstream reporter out there, NBC, CBS, Washington Post, NBC, tweet out, and people actually had on broadcast news, images, because it was sliced, it was edited, of them walking up there, and Abe standing next to Trump, and Trump taking all his food, throwing a little bit, then taking the entire thing and just dumping it into the water. And people were horrified. This is not how you feed koi. This is a horrible thing to do. What they didn't show was the 6 seconds before, when they were feeding fish, and Abe got to the bottom and he just did the same thing. So that's selective editing. It's not done to show reality. You can say fact check true, he did do it. You could say as a journalist, it is reality, he did do it. But what's the intent of the people that edit that? What are they really trying to get across? I think it's pretty obvious. Same thing happened recently when Trump was in Poland. Edited video of the First Lady of Poland sort of going past Trump and shaking hands with Melania. And it made it look like she brushed him off. But when you watch the whole thing, you see that's not the case. The other thing, and J.K. Rowling, who wrote Harry Potter, I know a lot about Harry Potter. I was a senior vice president of Warner Brothers when it was launched. And J.K. Rowling tweeted out, and it was already all over the media, an image where Trump was going up to say a speech at a microphone. And they showed the image of him leaving the microphone and going to these people, and his child was in a wheelchair, a very disabled kid, little kid, 6, 7 years old. And Trump seemed to ignore him and shake everybody else's hand. And this was tweeted out like, how heartless. He can't even say hello to a little child. It's horrible. What kind of man is a president? But yet if you go back and you look at that video, when Trump actually first walked into the room, he stopped. He said hello to this little child. He bent down and talked to him. He shook his hand. He spent like a full minute with him. And then he went up and gave a speech. So why is the media not showing that? There's a purpose. The media is showing you fake news. It's real. They can say, fact check true, it happened. But they're editing. Okay? So these go on, and I could bore you with many things. Let me just mention that the Washington Post, New York Times, etc., are no exception to this. People can say things that are true and leave things out, and they can then say, we checked it, we're not backing down, what we said is true, but they can leave things out, okay? And a lot of times these things get spread on Twitter or other places and be huge, and then later you get a denial and it gets like 35 tweets. Nobody really sees it, okay? When Trump fired Comey, people who were close to the intelligence community, in other words, ex-Obama intelligent people, maybe James Clapper, ex-CIA head who lied to Congress. People close to the intelligence community stated that funds were now being withdrawn from the investigation, the Russia investigation. That Comey got fired, and this was happening. The guy who's no fan of Trump, the number 2 who became the head of the Justice Department, testifying in Congress said that's not the case. No, we have all the funds, no problem. It was also stated that Trump, after firing Comey, was trying to fire this guy and asked him to resign as well. And he was interviewed by a reporter on the street following him, and he said, no, that's just not the case. But yet these lies, those were lies, went around the world in major papers, in major ways. And I want to leave you with one other thing, because I know you have planned. I'm sorry, 2 other things. I lied. I can make it 3 fast. Speaking of the LA Times, they have a Pulitzer Prize-winning cartoonist, David Horsey, who's a very talented man, but I dislike him because of his politics. But you know, the cartoonist has won 2 Pulitzers. And he did a very fact-shaming image and verbiage of Sarah Huckabee Parker, or whatever her name is, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who's the press secretary, okay? And calling her a chunky soccer mom and et cetera, okay? He got called out. He apologized. And then he was an idiot and went on TV with Megyn Kelly, who has her own challenges. And he apologized on air as well. And then Megyn Kelly says, you called, when I was at Fox, you called me and other people, other women that worked there, blonde Barbies, you know, thoughtless blonde Barbies on TV. Were you referring to me, since I have a law degree? Were you referring to Jamie Colby, who graduated high school at age 16 and practiced law for 10 years before becoming a journalist and winning a Murrow Award? Or maybe Leah Gabriel, who fought as a Navy fighter pilot in Afghanistan before becoming a Fox personality? And he was stunned, because it's never good for a man to be called out as a sexist on TV. So, second to last thing, if I can, I'm just going to pass this out. It's just a chart from CalPERS. Hang on one. So, as Jim has heard briefly, in another life, I got heavily involved in the city of Bell with the whole controversy down there and helping people. And I was asked by some citizens from a neighboring city of Huntington Park to go listen to a person from CalPERS. Does anybody not know who CalPERS is? Probably don't know who CalPERS is. Okay, they're the people that manage the pensions for hundreds of municipal and legislative organizations in the state. It's the retirement system. And I started digging into it, watching their videos, everything else. This is a screenshot. Maybe you can share, push thumb up. It's a screenshot of the CalPERS presentation that was done a year ago. And by the way, CalPERS, because every liberal thought when Trump went in, the stock market went down, they pulled back and lost because the stock market went up. They didn't lose, but they didn't gain what they should have. But what this shows is it shows a line of contributions made by the people in the California public system. It shows the investment gain, and then how much has to be paid out based on the 7% annual return that they're planning. You are on the hook for this money. You are on the hook for this money. You are on the hook for this money. By law, these retirees must get their pension. And if the money is not there at the end, you're liable. You as a citizen in the state have to cough up the dollars to pay this money. And it's already at, I think, 62 or 65% funding. Most pensions like to be at a minimum 80%. Now we're talking billions of dollars. And what this is showing is that even with their growth, money coming in from new people in the system, earnings that they project, that in out years, they're going to have a $9 billion annual deficit. Now the state of California budget's roughly, what, 150, 60 billion or something like that. It's a $9 billion annual deficit a year. A year. You owe it, okay? And because there are not reporters really looking into this appropriately, in my opinion, it's being swept under the rug. And what CalPERS has done is they've actually changed how they calculate things so that they are making it look better early through their what's called smoothing and pushing out the problem. The people that have to deal with it will be other people, the young people of California. So this $9 billion pension deficit that if you're not a public worker, you're not getting any nickel of it, you're liable for it, okay? And the last thing I want to do is I want to talk about communists. And it's something that really is interesting to talk to journalism students about, because in Los Angeles, you've heard of the McCarthy world, and nobody now talks about communism or communists. I just deleted 2 of them on Twitter, by the way. Said a lot of stuff on Antifa. And when you get involved in looking at organizations and people that are involved in movements or things you're writing about, look at their biography. Look at who they are, okay? The people that organized Occupy LA were communists. Mario Brito, if you took his name into the LA Times and you do a search, you'll see that the LA Times kept saying that the Occupy LA movement was a leaderless movement. Yet they kept going to Mario Brito for quotes. Okay. And I went, literally it is Twitter, but not Occupy LA, and I archived every tweet that he's done. And he praises North Korea, Lenin, and all sorts of other communist movements. And sure enough, he was in Chicago at a communist get-together. The guy's a communist. Now, I have no problem with him being a communist. He can have whatever political view he wants to have. But I had a problem with the LA Times not looking at his bio. If he was a Tea Party guy, they would have said he's a member of the Tea Party. But I couldn't get anybody to look at his bio, even when I served it up to them. Nobody wants to talk about communism. Let's just pretend they don't exist. And you know what? They don't exist, I don't have a problem with it. But at least if they're there and they're part of it, serve it up. Okay? And I'll leave you with this one thing. As Jim knows, I have a way too big ego. He's learning. I went to an Occupy LA rally. I'd followed them a lot. And Mario Brito was there. And this does end on an LA Times thing. I'll let you go. I'll get out of here. And it was thousands of people Occupy LA. They were marching on Bank of America. And there were a couple thousand people sort of at the top of these steps going down. And I was this close to Mario Brito as he's talking about revolution and whatever. And at one point, it kind of pissed me off. So there was a pause in the conversation. I went over and I grabbed a microphone, these thousands of people. And I said, Mario Brito, are you still a member of the Communist Party? And of course, all hell broke loose. They grabbed me. If you go back and look at the LA Times article, you'll see this old fat white guy there with an iPhone like this and people grabbing him. And so I just wanted the Times to just say or question it. And Kate Lithicum, how do you say her name?
Lithicum, yeah.
Came up to me afterwards. And she eventually wrote in the LA Times, a counter-protester approached the podium and said, are you still a member of the Communist Party? So I got it out there. At least people can look at it, right? But what pissed me off about Kate, and she's a wonderful reporter, the LA Times local reporters I love, was she kept coming up to me and saying, what is your statement? What statement do you want to make? And my statement was, I'm really upset that the LA Times will not report on his biography and that he's a member of the Communist Party. And she would say, well, I can't. No, I can't. No. What is it you really want to say? I want to say that I'm upset that the LA Times will not report that this gentleman, that they don't look at his biography and see if he's a member of the Communist Party. And she wouldn't write that down. So why is she asking me for my statement? There is a fear among reporters, because of the whole McCarthy era and everything else, to even acknowledge there are communists among us. It's okay. They can have their world. But if they're doing something, if their biography applies to the story, I think it should be written about. So I'll leave you with that. Jim, thank you for your time. for me getting my spiel out.